Okay, I'm back. Hopefully this will work. I hope you can see the screen well enough. I'm going to try and get the toolbar moved. All right, so as you can see, this is the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age runs from 1870 to 1900. It's roughly the period of time right after Reconstruction until the turn of the century. I will send you a link to this PowerPoint as well so that you can view it on your own. I do apologize for how I'm having to do this video right now. So the Gilded Age, as I said, is from 1870 to 1900. So what is the Gilded Age? It is an era of rapid economic and political growth. Okay, well, that is a nice little concise statement, but what it means is that the economy changes drastically and the political culture of the country changes drastically during this age. The economy grows in exponential ways. Political growth, more people become politically involved. There is a lot of growth in both of these areas. It is when the modern industrial economy is actually created. Transportation, communication networks come about during that time. What we know of as business organization today is created during that time. The idea of managers, management level positions are created during this time. Businesses had been just the owner was in charge and made the decisions, and now there's going to be a group of employees called managers. It's kind of the second industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution happens with the water wheel and that idea. But the second industrial revolution happens during this Gilded Age. We start harnessing steam power and many other innovations. Industrial towns and cities are created that center around factories or around businesses. The people that are hired are from many different ethnic backgrounds. There's a surge in immigration into the United States at this time. And so there are a lot of people from different backgrounds that are being hired and working, many of them together. And many of them are immigrants from Europe. The Irish is one very large group that came over during this time. It's a time when many industrialists and financiers become very, very rich. They're called robber barons, which is a derogatory term. Many people believe that these rich have cheated to get their money, and some had. But many had not. Many had come upon it through hard work and dedication, and many tried to use their newfound wealth to help others. Some did not, however. Some did take advantage. It was also a growth, or precipitated the growth of the labor union movement. It gave workers began to feel taken advantage of, which led to labor unions. Politics, sometimes it's called the third party system during the Gilded Age. There were very close contests between Republicans and Democrats, and many times there were third parties that had a very significant presence in the elections. Almost all the eligible men participated in the political process. Voter turnout a lot of times was 90% or more. So people were actively involved. It's also a time of very opulent wealth. The upper class had a lot of wealth, but they used some of it for public endowments. Many were philanthropists. They used their private money to help fund colleges, hospitals, libraries, performance houses, a lot of different charities. So even though these people were becoming very, very rich, they did believe that they had an obligation to give back to the community, and they did this through philanthropy. It also is a time in which we talk about great economic growth, but there was actually a depression during this time, the Panic of 1893, that actually lasts until 1897. At this time, they don't call economic downturns depressions. They call them panics. This panic or this depression actually caused a lot of political realignment for the election of 1896. It had a huge impact on the election of 1896. And the Gilded Age is followed by the Progressive Era, which is going to come about because of the politics of this time period. So one of the most notable characteristics of the Gilded Age is the ostentatious wealth. And these are pictures of homes that were built by some of the most wealthy people. The picture in the upper right corner, I'm not sure if you can read it through the video, but it's J.D. Rockefeller's residence in Cleveland, Ohio. And these wouldn't be the only homes that these people would own. They would have homes like this in multiple places. This is the age of mansions. This is another picture to show you about the opulent wealth. This is Mr. and Mrs. John D. Rockefeller arriving in Cleveland. And you can see that they are very well dressed, impeccably dressed, as a matter of fact, and rode in the highest style of the time when they traveled. This was a time of two different worlds. You had very, very wealthy people, and then you had people who were not wealthy. The wealthy lived extravagant lifestyles, and they considered themselves elitist. You see in the top picture an example of a wealthy lifestyle. Let me zoom in on that a little bit for you. You can see it's a man and a little girl playing chess. There's the mother is looking on. They're in a very well-furnished room, lots of space, lots of sunlight coming through the windows, very nicely dressed. So hopefully you can see all of that. And then the bottom picture shows you what the common family would be like. So you can see there's no draperies, no curtains at the windows. The windows are open to let in what little bit of air they can. The family is all gathered around the table eating, but they just have basically a little bowl of something to eat. It's a mother and three children. You don't see the father anywhere. He could be off to work. He could be out of the home for some reason. But you can see that it's kind of a dreary place that they live in. Their clothes seem to be a little dirty and well worn. This was the contrast during the time. The common people resented the snobbish attitudes of the elite, of the rich. There was a caste system in the U.S. This was an age of millionaires. In 1861, there were 3 millionaires in the entire country. By 1900, there were 3,800 millionaires. 90% of the wealth was controlled by 10% of the population in 1900. So you can see there was a huge disparity between the classes. This was also a time of political machines. Political machines were organized groups that controlled a city's political party. So what would happen is, especially in large cities or large counties, someone who had a lot of money and was able to amass a lot of power would control the politics of that area. They would gain this control, gain this power by giving services to the voters. But they would only give these services to the voters if the voters would promise to vote their way in the elections. And if you did not vote the way that the political machine wanted you to vote, then you would lose these services and things even as essential as a place to live or a job could be controlled by these political machines. Just about every major city had a political machine after the Civil War. The machine organization consisted of precinct captains, ward bosses, and then the city boss. The city boss was the top boss. So the role of the political boss, he would serve as mayor a lot of times. He would get elected as the mayor, but he'd also be the political boss. Because he was the mayor, he could control city jobs and business licenses. He could influence court decisions and judicial appointments, different agencies within the municipality. He could arrange for building projects to be done and then award those building projects to who he wanted. And he determined what services the community received. The bosses would get paid by the businesses, and they would use the voters' loyalty and their influence over the voter to keep things positive for these businesses. So pretty much what the businesses wanted, they could get. Immigrants played a huge part in these political machines. Many captains or bosses were first or second generation Americans. The machines would help immigrants when they got to the United States. They would help them become naturalized citizens. They would help them get jobs, secure housing. And so the immigrants often felt indebted to the political machine, and they were very loyal to it. A lot of times they used election fraud and graft in order to achieve their goal. They would stuff ballot boxes or conduct intimidation to keep people from going and voting against them. They would take kickbacks or bribes to allow activities, whether they were legal or illegal. And they would engage in what was called graft, which was the illegal use of political influence for personal gain. The biggest boss that we know of was William Boss Tweed. He was the political leader of New York City. He put New York City in debt. He was elected to the city council in 1851. He served in Congress in 1852. And he was able to keep the Democratic Party in power in New York City for a very long time. They called this Tammany Hall. And he formed what was called the Tweed Ring. They bought votes, they encouraged corruption, and for all intents and purposes, they completely controlled New York City politics during this time. They got a lot of kickbacks from the Erie Railroad. A kickback is a portion, you get back a portion of the money that an entity receives in a sale or some sort of contract or endeavor. The Tweed Ring would milk the city. They would write up false leases. They would pad bills. Like if they needed new locks on a building and the locks cost $100, they'd charge $1,100. They would make unnecessary repairs, or they would overprice goods so that they had plenty of money to run their machine. It was exposed for corruption by a cartoonist and editor named Thomas Nast. This is one of his political cartoons. The Tweed Ring fell, and in 1873, Tweed was actually convicted of embezzlement. Later, he was arrested on a civil charge. He was put in jail in New York City, and he actually died in the New York City jail. In your Reconstruction unit, you learned about the scandals in President Grant's during President Grant's presidency. The Credit Mobilier scandal. It was a phony construction company owned by the stockholders of the Union Pacific Railroad. They hired this Credit Mobilier to build the Transcontinental Railroad. They charged the government about twice as much as what the project actually cost. They tried to bribe Congress to stop the investigation, and it wound up being the largest scandal in U.S. history, but it led to greater public awareness of government corruption. So it ended up at least doing some good. Then there was also the Whiskey Ring, which was a group of President Grant's officials that imported whiskey. They used their positions to avoid paying those taxes and wound up cheating the U.S. Treasury out of millions of dollars. There was the salary grab, where Congress gave itself a $5,000 to $7,500 annual pay raise. They received retroactive checks for their $5,000 and the raise. It became a huge political issue, and later on it was actually repealed, but So you can see there are a lot of scandals that are going on during this time that are going to cause people to get involved politically and maybe change some political views. Then you have President Garfield's election. And you also learned about this in your Reconstruction unit. This is what actually ends Reconstruction in the South, because there is a bargain that is reached to get Garfield elected. The South basically allows Garfield to become the president as long as the Union takes the remaining troops out of the South. The 1880 presidential election, the Democrats were Hancock and English. They were the ones running. And in the election of 1880, Garfield takes the election. He wins the election with a bare margin of the popular vote. And again, without that deal for Reconstruction, he would not have actually won. The spoils system. Now, we first saw the spoils system under Andrew Jackson, but it had continued throughout this time. And under the spoils system or patronage, candidates for a political office could give jobs to people or offer jobs to these people for votes. So if you vote for me, when I get in office, I'll give you this position. It gave supporters access to money and political favors. And both sides really did this. During the Gilded Age, both sides were equally guilty of doing this. They would do it to keep party members loyal and to reward supporters and to avoid controversial issues. So the two parties, who they appeal to is going to begin to be redefined. The Republicans are going to appeal to industrialists, bankers, and Eastern farmers. So these are going to be business people, bankers, and the Eastern farmers that have the large farms. They're going to favor the gold standard because they say it's sound money. Money's only good for the amount of gold that we have. And they favored high tariffs because it protected their businesses. They also favored blue laws, which were regulations that kept people from doing certain activities that were considered immoral, things like shopping on Sunday. The Democrats tended to attract the less privileged group. They tended to be preferred by northern urban immigrants, by common laborers, southern planters, and western farmers. People who were tended to be struggling economically seemed to like the Democrats. The Democrats supported soft money and silver coinage. Soft money meant like what we have now, fiat money, paper money that really doesn't have anything backing it. So President Garfield was elected president. Unfortunately, he was assassinated. He was assassinated by an upset spoilsman, someone that felt they should have gotten a position under the spoils system and didn't. So Chester Arthur, the vice president, becomes the president. Chester Arthur supports a change in the spoils system. Probably partially had to do with the fact that Garfield had been assassinated over the spoils system. And Chester Arthur decided he didn't particularly care to have that happen to him. He signed into law the Pendleton Act and the Civil Service Act, and what these did was it required that you had to have certain qualifications to be considered and offered government positions. This is just a picture of, or an artist's rendition sketch of Garfield's assassination. The gentleman who did the assassination, this is a quote from him at the bottom: "I am a stalwart and Arthur is president now." In other words, if you're not going to be true to what you said you would do for me, then you don't deserve to continue to be president. Sorry, trying to adjust the screen here. Okay. So during the 1880 election, the Republicans were split into three factions. You had the stalwarts, who defended the spoils system. You had the half-breeds, who said that it needed reform, but they still supported it. And the independents, who said that the spoils system needed to go away. Garfield wanted reforms. His running mate Chester Arthur was a stalwart, which supported the spoils system. And on January 2nd, 1881, Garfield was assassinated by a stalwart who wanted Arthur to be president. He probably believed that if he did that, Chester Arthur would then give him the position he thought he was entitled to. Rutherford B. Hayes is elected in 1877, and he actually reforms the civil service by appointing qualified political independents. He has no congressional support. He has no support from the Republican Party. So therefore, he does not seek re-election. He knows he's not going to get it anyway, so why seek it? Now, I told you the Pendleton Act was one of the Civil Service Acts. I do apologize again for this video. It's what's called the Magna Carta of Civil Service Reform. It said that 14,000 out of the 117,000 federal jobs became civil service exam positions starting in 1883. By 1900, 100,000 out of the 200 jobs were civil service jobs. So they continuously increased the number of jobs for which you had to have a minimum of qualifications in order to serve in that position. This is just a chart. This will be in I will send you a link to this PowerPoint so you can see this chart a little bit better, but it's just showing you how the change was made for people who were holding government positions. We had another assassination during the Gilded Age, and right at the end of the Gilded Age, and that was of President McKinley. President McKinley had become, I'm going to actually try and change the orientation. No, that's not working. Again, I apologize. The technology I was planning on using did not work. And for some reason, this is wanting to act up on me now too. But President McKinley had been elected president. He'd been reelected actually in 1900 and was starting his second term, but he was assassinated in 1901. His vice president was Teddy Roosevelt. So obviously Teddy Roosevelt is going to become the president. The 1870s, we're going all the way back to the 1876 election, talking about Hayes. I'm going to skip that part. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm going to skip this part. This is going over that deal that was put forth for the end of Reconstruction and for the election of the president. Okay, so this is also the time that we see laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire economics is an economic belief that the U.S. supported, but it opposes government regulating business. Laissez-faire is actually French for let it alone, let it be. In other words, the idea is the government needs to stay out of the economics, stay out of business, and let the market adjust itself as needed. And businesses have been operating without much government regulation during this time. It supports an economic system of capitalism, and that had been working very well for many people during this time. Many people still believe in laissez-faire economics, that the market should fix itself when there is a problem. From 1870 to 1900, the government did very little domestically. Its main duties on the domestic front was to deliver mail, maintain a military, collect taxes, conduct foreign policy, administer the Civil War pensions, and that was it. That's all they thought they should have to do. Everything else was up to the states or to individuals. The capitalist economic system emphasized private property ownership. It said that individuals and companies would compete for their own economic gain or profit. It said that the factors of production would be held by private individuals or private companies, and that capitalists could determine the prices of goods and services. Production and distribution would be privately or corporately owned. Profits could be reinvested, and it supported laissez-faire, a laissez-faire attitude. Socialism was another economic system or belief of the day. We were seeing a lot of this in Eastern Europe and in Russia. It's during not too long after this time, Russia is going to have its communist revolution. Socialism is an economic system based on cooperation rather than competition. It says that the government should have ownership of the businesses and capital. Now, socialism isn't quite as extreme as communism. Socialism says the government should own some of it. Communism says it should own all of it. The government could control production and distribution of goods, and it's the opposite of laissez-faire and capitalism. It looks for a lot of government involvement. And that is the end of our PowerPoint. Hopefully you have learned a lot from this. It has helped you understand the information that is in your book. If you have any questions, you can email them to me, or we can discuss them on Thursday when I see you for Skype. I hope you have a great rest of the day.